Oh, my rant for the day. You know, I've done something like 600 videos on YouTube over the past 10 or 12 years. Now they have these new videos where you can do them, 1 minute video. I'm trying to get a little information in a 1 minute video, but you're going to get this much information in a 1 minute video. I have one video that goes viral showing me assembling one of these knives. And every mother's son thinks they know about what I'm doing on these videos in 59 seconds. You're welded the tang on. Oh, you welded a bolt onto the back of the tang of the knife, even though I clearly say that the tang is forged. But most of these guys who comment don't probably have a clue about what forged is. So, of course, I do a response video and nobody sees it. So, because that's just the way it is. At least on TikTok, you can do a response video to people that leave comments on your videos. Can't do that with YouTube. So, but this is the knife in question. So this is a fully forged knife made out of a piece of this truck spring. The blade is forged out of one side of the truck spring, and the tang is forged out of the other side of the truck spring. There is no weld. I cut these threads using a tool called a die. And then sometimes, once I put all the pieces together, I will use a cap nut. Now I'm building knives to sell, so I am always trying to come up with a more efficient way of building a knife. Sometimes I feel like the knife shape didn't turn out as nice as I wanted it to, so I sometimes don't put a bunch of extra time into them. I know that because I don't like it, somebody will come along and like that knife. How do I know? So all of that gets stacked up like that. Now this is not done. This is not finished. This is a knife that's half finished that I use as display when I'm doing the knife making classes. Yes, I teach knife making classes. 35 years of blacksmithing and 25 years of making knives professionally, I do knife making classes. Sometimes I will just make a big washer to go on here and then use a cap nut to screw down on the top of this. Sometimes I actually make the nut. And that screws on after you get everything on the handle. Well, one of the other comments was, oh, that handle's going to twist like a MFer. Okay, well, here's the thing. This tang is forged out to 3/8 of an inch, and generally I run a couple of little flats on that son of a gun. Also, you notice that it's tight, it's loose. So if 3/8 of an inch is 0.375 of an inch times 3.15. That's pi. That's the circumference around the tang. So that gives you an inch. That gives you 1.18 inches, about that much gluing capacity, 3 times the diameter of the gluing capacity all the way around that, plus the entire length. And the length of that is, let's see, about the inside of that is about 3 1/4 inches. So you've got 3 1/4 inches of glue times 1.125 of glue all the way around. Now, here's how I can tell that when people come in and comment that they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Because if you've ever glued a handle onto a tang like this, and then for some reason had to take it off, you have to physically bust that off with a hammer in tiny little pieces to get that piece of horn off of there. And then you have to saw or grind all of the little leather and nylon spacer fillers that I use. Because that is a lot of gluing slash epoxy or whatever you're using holding power. So if you're worried about my handle spinning on here after I get everything tightened up and suck all that down, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Because here's a full tang knife, and actually, because you have to split it in half and you only get to glue one side of each side of this, you actually get less capacity for gluing on this knife than you do on this one. Okay, so what was one of the other? Oh, some people didn't like the cap nut. Well, that's great. I'm glad you don't like the cap nut because I've done probably 50 of those knives with the cap nut on them. And guess what? How many I have to show you? 0. I've sold every one of them. What was some of the other? There was just so much hate. It is just ridiculous to me. I guarantee you that I probably made more knives last week than all of the guys who commented on that video have cumulatively. Right? Thanks to Forged in Fire, boy, the internet has made a whole bunch of professionals about a whole bunch of things that they have no. It's like it's back in the old days. We only had armchair quarterbacks because we didn't have any internet. But nowadays we have a whole bunch of knife makers who have never made knives and don't have that can't tell the difference between shit and shoe polish. So yeah, so there you go. I can do rectangle tangs, and absolutely I do rectangle tangs on some of the big knives. I do square tangs, especially if I'm going to put a guard on them, because if you're going to put a guard on a knife, you can do a round one like that, especially if you set it down to where it hammers into the ricassio of the back of the blade. And I get that all screwed on. That guard's not going anywhere. But if you're going to do something where it doesn't have that, then what you do is you do a square hole and a square tang and the key together, and that way the guard doesn't twist. Well, how do most people drill a square hole? You don't square. You punch a square hole. So I have behind me and that bunch of tools back here where that forge is at, I've got every size of square punch you can imagine that I've made. And I can punch any size hole that I want. I can punch the hole and forge the tang to exactly fit the guard that I have the corresponding hole punched in. But of course, you can't say this stuff during a 1-minute video because we're all watching 1-minute videos now, and I know that everybody's seeing my 1-minute videos, but nobody goes back and watches the longer ones because I have thousands and thousands of views on my short videos, and I have 100 or 200 views on my long form videos. Go figure. So that's how this goes. Can I do flat knives? Can I do stock removal knives? Sure you can. Can you do a hidden tang or a blind tang or a Henry tang on a flat tang knife? Sure you can. Can you get a nice fit? Absolutely. How did I cut that tang on there? I used a punch. So are you going to tell me that this tang is going to be stronger than this tang? Come on. The thousands of knives I've built and probably hundreds of knives I've built like this, I've never gotten any of these back. What happens with these is especially if you're doing blind handles where you're going to stab a piece of horn or stab a piece of wood over the top of this. What ends up happening is when you're using that knife, they waddle out. The wood grain gets compressed. It busts out the inside of the horn, and they get loose. And even if you pin it, they still end up getting loose because guys use knives as axes and hammers and pry bars. So I've actually had a lot more trouble making knives on this style platform than this style platform. The great thing about this is if you have this knife all put together and you happen to drop this knife or something like that, I can fix it in 20 minutes most usually. I just unscrew the cap screw, bust the handle out, drill another 3/8 hole in there, fill it full of glue, slide it back down on there, tighten everything up. I don't even need a clamp because I can put a little epoxy or Loctite or something in the threads, tighten it all back up, let it set, and then go over to the sander and go, and it matches everything that's already hasn't been hurt. This is a much harder process because what you have to do if you're doing some kind of a blind tang on a knife like this, you have to fiddle around with the hole, and you never get the hole right for the width of the tang. You can do a Japanese style kind of buried tang where you take your piece of wood or you take your piece of bone and you scribe around the tang, and then you put a mortise in there so it fits, and then you do it with the other side, and then you match them up. But man, talk about time consuming. I'm in the business of selling knives. That's what I do. On many years, I do 300 or 400 knives a year. So I'm looking for a simple solution. This is a much simpler solution. I can pre-do all my components because they all have the same hole size. It's all 3/8. Everything's 3/8. And then when you get this set, you get this guard set on there and you lock that in the vise and you hammer that down. It actually, because this is aluminum, it sets right back, it sets right down on there, and it makes a key weight and it won't spin. Works pretty good. Oh, somebody was like, oh, aluminum sucks, I don't like aluminum. Well, tell that to the Germans after World War II, because they took every old pot, pan, mess kit, artillery shell, and they melted all that shit down, and for 50 years there was a company called Edge Blades, and every blade that came out of Solheim, Germany, that had a guard on it, that had a pommel cap on it, that had inlays in it, it was all made out of recycled Nazi aluminum from canteens and mess kits and forks and spoons and all the shit that was left over after the war. I had one that I could show you, but my son codged onto it and he has carried it off out of here. He liked it. It was a big Bowie knife and he carried it out of here because he liked it so much. So do I do them with brass? Yes. Do I do them with big pieces of copper? Absolutely. I've done copper. Clearly I've done steel, because here's one with steel. Everybody's making assumptions about you in a 59-second video. How many knives I've made. I know that there was at least 5 or 6 years there that I was producing at least 400 knives a year. And this year I've probably done near 100. Because right now my leather guy has 7 that he's doing leather for right now. He's doing sheaths for 7 right now, and we're in October. He counted up all the patterns of knife sheaths that he's done for me over the last 12 years. Same guy's been doing all of my leather work. Shout out to Joel. And we got to be well over 700 knife sheaths that Joel has done for me just in the last 10 years. And of course, not every knife that goes out of this shop, probably only half of them have sheaths. So there you go. But I do all kinds of knives. A lot of these knives, like this one, you'd have a heck of a time doing something like that if you couldn't forge, because this is all one piece and this is forged out. Same thing with this. It's pretty hard to turn this piece of spring into this knife if you're not forging it. Do I think that a forged knife is superior in any way to a stock removed knife? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But this is but it does give me the opportunity to do a lot of different designs that you can't do with a stock removal knife. And I do stock removal knives. And my even my full tang knives, most of them, pretty much every knife that goes out of this shop is underneath the power hammer and gets heated up in the forge at least once, because this knife was actually using this. So everybody's a critic. And after a week or two of that, it's just so funny that everybody comes on and watches one video in 60 seconds, 59 seconds, and actually takes them longer to comment than it does to watch the video. So what the hell does that tell you about people? Mostly it tells me that there's a whole bunch of people out there just full of hate and discontent and just like to get on that. Because I know that those people would not come into the shop and talk to me the way they do in the comments. They wouldn't do it. There's none of them brave enough. Number one, I could prove them wrong in about 15 minutes. And then, of course, I have the guys that go, well, you could be a little humble. Well, in many cases, I am humble, especially when I have really great craftsmen that come into the shop. As Ernie Marsh, who's probably one of the premier silver bit and spur makers in the whole country. Guys like John Gallus and Lester Santos, who are some of probably the most premier furniture makers in the whole country, coming into this shop and buying stuff from me. Yeah, I'm pretty humble in the eyes of those guys. But when I just have some random guy on the internet who you go to his page and he's got no, a forged blade. You can do things with forge. He comes on and comments, oh, it's welded. No, it's not. I cut those threads. I made a die. I used a die to cut the threads on the end of that, and I used a tap to cut the threads and inspect for you. Everybody has a great Sunday. Get it hot and headed, always wear your safety suits. If you like the content or you have some kind of legitimate question that you are ask me, like if you have real questions and are just hate towards my page or me or whatever, I'll happily answer your teacher. They should be teaching me. Get it hot and headed, always wear your safety suits. If you like the content, slip over to the Cody Iron Works and